it was great fun, great fun.
You obviously had a good relationship with the boys. At the time you started at Blairs, most schools would have had corporal punishment.
Ah, yes.
Blairs didn't. I mean, did you find that a good thing or a bad thing? How did you cope with discipline at Blairs?
I think it was a good thing.
Uh-huh.
Although, I must say, St. Aloysius had corporal punishment, but it was a very carefully regulated method of dealing with it. If you misbehaved, as I did on several occasions, you weren't punished there and then, but you were issued with what amounts really to a cheque. I mean CHEQUE. We called them bills. There was a little booklet. The teacher who thought you deserved a punishment would write on it, tear it off and hand it to you, and keep the counterfoil. And you had to present the bill later to the Master of Discipline, who was just that, the Master of Discipline. He did administrative work as well, but he didn't teach. And he was a very humane man. There would be most days at the morning interval a line of pupils on the staircase outside his office, up from his office. One would be there because he'd forgotten his swimming trunks. One would be there because he needed permission to leave school early to catch a bus. And several would be there because they had a bill. So when it came, first of all, he was a northern Englishman with a bluff sort of attitude. He would open his door and say, "Bills first, bills first." Now that in itself was humane. Get it over with. So you went in, and the bill that you had been given stated the number of strokes of the belt that you were to get. Minimum 4, or 6, or 12, or double of any of those amounts. But the double, I don't think, were normally administered on the same day. You had to come back again. Anyway, it wasn't a traditional Loch Gelly. It was more like the sole of a size 13 adult shoe. Leather, shaped like a sole, and it was administered on the hand. It was sore, but it was over and done with, and I don't think anybody objected to the idea. You had done something wrong, you were paying the penalty, and that was it, finished. So when I came to Blairs, there was nothing like that. There was a culture of giving written penances. You had to write out something, sometimes a large number of times. I don't remember how often, if at all, I administered that kind of punishment. Probably very seldom. I mean, the idea of committing somebody to write out, let us say, well, a religious text, like, write out the Our Father 20 times, kind of puts you off praying, Or write out, what was it I came upon in the Blairs booklet, the magazine? Write out, "Silence is golden," 250 times. Good heavens, come on. But there was no corporal punishment, no.
Yeah. As far as I can tell, there was none at Fortrose or indeed at Scallon.
Well.
So nothing is ever mentioned in the records, certainly, about it.
Right.
Yeah, so which makes them, the Scottish seminaries quite unusual, you would think.
I suppose so, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So what contribution do you think, what do you think was the most important contributions you made to the students and the lives of the students?
To the lives of the students?
I mean, many of them, as you say, went on to other professions, other jobs and so on, but you still contributed to them, their life.
Oh, yes.
Yes, that's the thing.
Yes. Well, I mean, for a start, it's an old-fashioned idea, but I think it's still true, that if you study Latin, and obviously all the more so if you study Latin and Greek and French, then you will be equipped to be a clearer, to express yourself more clearly and to be more comfortable with language. So, you know, the people who went on, certainly, I remember that the students who joined me in Rome, who had been in Blairs as students, I wasn't, but they were, at least 2 of them became sheriffs, quite distinguished people. One of them, when I last heard of him, which was a long time ago, had been sent as part of his army service to learn Chinese so that he could be an interpreter. Well, that's a contribution to that. Cannot be a waste of time, you know. But, I mean, I think probably my classes were reasonably pleasant to attend, given the requirement to get on with the lesson.
I was at a meeting of some Blairs students at the Memorial Mass recently, and I can't remember if I put it down on the list as a thing, but I was reminded of a Greek urn, a lesson.
Oh, yes. That was an April Fool's Day trick. I, of course, was the teacher of Greek or Latin or both. I remember the room in which it happened. Somewhere, I don't know how, I got hold of a plastic urn. You know, a vase, that size.
I was told it came from the sacristy, but I'm not sure.
No, I don't think it would have. It was made of plastic. It wasn't Greek. It wasn't Latin. And it wasn't sacred, as far as I know. Just a big flower vase. Anyway, I managed to create a situation where I came in and pretended to be terribly, terribly careful with this and talked my way into the classroom and said, "No, we'll put it there, but don't move suddenly or anything." And eventually I knocked it over, and that's all. But
it's still remembered.
This must be still remembered.
Yeah.
But there were other things as well. I mean, you were wondering about. You wrote something about my nickname. Uh-huh. My nickname. Well, my name is Moran. And in an English class, rather than with my class, some of the students were taught about the figure of speech called oxymoron. And they saw the similarity and they said, oxymoron, yes. And they used that as a nickname for, I think, a day. And then somebody called it moxymoron. And they used that for a short time. And then they dropped the Moran bit and called it Moxie, and finally Mox. And there was one day which really, if you like, made my day. I think the student concerned was a MacNeil. Was it Jamie MacNeil or was it Gerard MacNeil? No, it was either Jamie MacNeil or Jerry Mackay. Anyway, it was not by any means a rare occurrence that I would be late for class. So on this particular occasion, I was late for class, and one of the boys was dispatched up to the priest's corridor to find out if I had dropped dead, or the news was not so pleasant as that I would be coming down. And he went back down to the classroom, took a piece of chalk and wrote on the board, Mox venit, sed sero venit. Mox is coming, or perhaps he's coming soon, but he'll be late. And I thought, great, terrific. These people are actually learning some Latin. It was funny how, I don't suppose people think of a joke by the teacher as something that pleases the teacher, but that certainly pleased me. Oh dear, yeah.
I can remember, and even with Davy Brown that you were talking about before, one of his jokes, and I can't even remember what word it was, but it was a word with either one L or two L's, and it had been spelt the wrong way.
Yes.
And he actually said, then there's an L of a difference. And it's weird how, because it's a teacher that said it to you, you remember that for all the rest of your life.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I tell you what the word might be, because it often occurs to me. The Latin word vale, with one L, literally means be healthy, but it's always translated as goodbye. And the Latin word vale with two L's is the ablative of vallis, meaning a valley. So if you say the Salve Regina in Latin, one of the phrases is, in this vale of tears, in hac lacrimarum valle. It has to have two L's if you're being careful, because otherwise you're saying, in this goodbye of tears. And you're not saying that, you're saying in this valley of tears. Valley and valle with two L's. Yeah, so that may have been the word.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look back in your years at Blairs, what are the sort of prominent, if any, questions that sort of stand out to you about, that you ask yourself about Blairs, in the sense, what was it? Should it have closed decades before it did?
Mm-hmm.
Was it actually a worthwhile experience, etc.? And obviously, the other thing that we have to also recognise is that there was, bullying and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
At Blairs. I think not as much as you might have had if we had had corporal punishment in the college, because I think that's an additional factor in a lot of these situations. But what do you think when you think of those sort of questions about should Blairs have been closed down long before it was?
Mm-hmm.
I know there was a debate going on in the church. There's some articles in the Clavis Renyi magazine, for example.
Yes, St. Peter's College magazine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of questions there.
Yeah.
First of all, take the bullying. This is bullying by older boys with the younger boys as victims, or I suppose occasionally bullying by contemporaries, where one was a strong-willed one and the other was a weak one. The first thing I would say is this. When Father John Angus MacDonald became a member of the staff, now dead, of course, well, not of course, but now dead, a very, very talented man from Argyll and the Isles Diocese, graduate in Welsh and Gaelic. He said to me once, shortly after he came to Blairs as a member of staff, as soon as I heard that I was going to Blairs as a member of staff, I resolved that whatever else I did, I would try to reduce the bullying that I remember as a student. In other words, it must have been quite widespread.
Uh-huh.
The only bullying that I often heard mentioned it was never called bullying. It was the system of the tables in the refectory, where I think right up to the end of Blairs, there were 6 students at a table, except if there were 1 or 2 students, so to speak, left over, who became the 7th. And this was a hierarchical, an age hierarchy system. But the oldest one at the table was not called the chairman. He was called the divider. There was a divider, a subdivider,
Subscrub.
I think you've missed one. Was the subscrub not the 4th one?
No, it was
Subscrub, second lowest, and lowest.
And T-man as well.
Or T-man. Which was the T-man?
T-man sat opposite the divider.
Was he below the subscrub
Yes.
in rank?
Uh-huh.
Well, the names give the thing away immediately. Some dividers, not all, I think it's fair to say, and I only know this from people who were students telling me afterwards, some dividers divided everything that came into 7 portions. 1 for each of the 6, and 1 for him, an extra one. And apparently, even those members of staff who knew that this was happening felt unable to do anything about it. Partly because, partly I think because the only meal that the staff were present for was lunch. The staff ate in the staff dining room upstairs for all other meals, breakfast, afternoon tea if there was any, and the evening meal. So for someone inclined to bully by depriving younger students of their proper share, the possibility was there very easily. Bullying in the other sense of taking somebody, round behind the wash place and battering the life out of them or something, I do not know whether that happened or happened much, but certainly the bullying over the food in the refectory is a well-established truth. It did happen, and I think it kept happening even into the days of someone like Father John Angus MacDonald, who was determined to stamp it out.
It was sometimes justified by some people saying that, obviously a 17, 18-year-old needs more food than a 13, 14-year-old.
Maybe.
But and obviously towards the end of the college's life, I think even those names had gone because it was just first and second year at tables by themselves, third and fourth year, and then fifth and sixth year.
Oh, I see.
They all had separate.
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah, they all had separate. I can remember the extension to the refectory. It was
that's right.
It was just fifth and sixth year. That were
The old sewing room of the sisters.
That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, the basic question is: did I think that the Blairs, that it was right that it continued, and should it have closed earlier, and so on and so on?
I mean, was it discussed much amongst the staff at all? Because you get sometimes impressions that some of the members of staff even thought it should close.
Yeah. I honestly don't know if it was openly discussed. I think almost certainly it was. I have a suspicion that any discussion would really be along the lines of, should Blairs already have closed, rather than should it now close? In other words, is it a pity that we are being asked to continue a system that really we don't think is fit for purpose? But then,
would you say that some of the staff, or even the majority of the staff, for example, felt they were almost, wasting their time when they could be in parishes, and that would have been more productive for them personally and the church?
Well, I think anyone who had been for any substantial length of time, let's say 5 years or longer, in a parish, felt that he would rather not have been appointed to Blairs. And at the end of the time that he spent at Blairs, he would be very, very pleased to be back in parish work. That's the attitude, I think. Those of us who hadn't been at Blairs at all as students, I think the main thing that we felt we had enjoyed was family life at home. It wasn't what happened at school that we found difficult, or in fact we probably felt that Blairs was a bit more enlightened than some of the schools. I mean, take a very simple example. All the time I was in Blairs, as far as I remember, on the staff, there were Monday, Wednesday and Friday were full teaching days. But Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday, well, first of all, Saturday morning was a teaching morning, which must have been very odd. It must have seemed very odd to anybody coming to Blairs, if any did, only for fourth year or fifth year. But I think that was very unusual. But the idea of a free afternoon or a sports afternoon or a different afternoon on a Tuesday and on a Thursday surely must have eased the load. The idea of having to go to the study hall for evening study, that may have been a burden. But on the other hand, you probably got more work done than you would get done at home, with the family milling about and the television possibly on and so on. I remember when I was in 5th or 6th year at school, and my brother Joe was 2 years younger, on a Saturday evening, or a Sunday evening especially, there was weekend homework. And I remember him on one occasion asking me something about a point of Greek that he was dealing with in his Greek homework. And being me, I started to explain that if you did such and such with the word and you'd see the root of it, and he said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, just tell me what it means. I want to get out and play cricket." But they had to do the homework, So to be part of a huge group, all of whom had to go to the study hall, there was no question about it, and you knew exactly how long you would be spending there, maybe that wasn't as bad as it sounds,
Yeah. I mean, I've always thought one of the things with Blairs that certainly influenced my life was just a sense of fairness as well. But but as you say, self-discipline.
Yes.
In the sense of all these periods of silent study, but also silence in general. Sometimes even for days on end, if it was talking about a retreat or something.
Yes.
But it's sort of taught you self-discipline, and even today, I mean, I'm quite happy in silence. Whereas, most people, including my son, I can't imagine them sitting in silence. He would have the TV on or the radio or headphones or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway.
That reminds me of a slightly different point. I think it must have been on the very first day that I was resident in Blairs. Certainly on the very first day on which there were pupils there. I think that was also my first day. And that reminds me of the Blairs train, but never mind, stick with that first day. I suppose I thought, well, I better be a decent, law-abiding member of staff. So I'll go down to the chapel before breakfast and say some prayers. So I went down to the chapel and found the boys were there, maybe not the whole school, but certainly a large number of them, and nobody else except a priest who was giving them a talk. And I slipped into the priest's bench and just, I think, prayed and maybe listened to what he was saying, I don't know. But afterwards, he came to me and, not angrily, but very insistently said, "Oh, please don't come when I'm giving those talks. I prefer to be giving them with no other priest listening." Fair enough. But the point about it is, it was 7 o'clock in the morning. What on earth are they getting a spiritual talk for at 7 o'clock in the morning? So that is a tiny detail of the discipline of a house. Maybe it was 7:30, I don't know, but it was first thing in the morning. Before breakfast, they were expected to listen to a spiritual talk.
Yeah.
Come on. So, there was a strictness about the place. But that changed gradually, very much so. And in one way, one of the clearest examples was in sport. I think it's fair to say that in my early years, say the middle to late 60s, basically everybody played football, some badly, some hating it, and others very well, very, very well. Later, gradually, the options were broadened, and eventually they had the system, you'll remember it as a member of staff, I think, where on a Thursday, everybody had to do some kind of afternoon. Everyone had to do a certain kind of sport. But on the Tuesday, sheets went up on the notice board by the wash place, and you had to put down a first and a second choice. And the reason was, it must have been very irritating if 17 people wanted to play football. Do you play 8 against 9? Do you make the 9th one the referee? And anyway, who wants to play 8-a-side football? So you put down a first choice and a second choice. If possible, you would get your first choice. If there was a gap in the numbers needed for team sport, you might be transferred to your second choice. But the choices, there must have been about 15 or 20 options. There was football, there was golf, there was cross-country running, there was orienteering, there was tennis, there was cycling for the seniors. On some Thursdays there would be swimming.
Because I was going to say swimming with...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so on. Well, that must have been a kind of rationalisation and humanisation of the sports side. I mean, Lots of Scots boys love football, but
Yeah.
some people can't stand it.
Yeah. There was always obviously athletics in third term, but one of the sports that seemed to drop out and had done by the time I arrived, even in '68, was cricket, which seemed to be quite a big sport and had house competitions and all sorts.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you why. At least I'll give you some of the reasons why. The main reason was cricket is an early summer sport. You can't really play it in March. And early summer was Highers.
Uh-huh.
The Highers used to be, I think, in March,
Yes. Uh-huh.
but then they moved them later.
Yeah.
And so the senior boys were certainly preoccupied about the exams, and the exams themselves were on, because the Scottish Leaving Certificate took no account of Tuesday and Thursday being sports afternoons. I think that's the main reason.
Yeah, I mean, the thing was, in the history of Blairs, if you read some of the old magazine articles from Clavis Renier and so on, I mean, they even got new pitches put down, and it came from Holland.
Oh.
You know, the turf. Down
Yes, I know what you mean, yeah. I didn't know that.
And obviously there was also traditions that if somebody managed to hit a six and smash a college window, you were supposed to get a play day. Never happened as far as I'm aware.
Yes, that would be a very strong incentive.
Yeah.
Yes, there used to be cricket matches, not in my time, visiting priests against the students.
The Blair Society, I think it was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There was also, I mean, again, Blairs actually played against Aberdeen men. And apparently, some of them were playing, doing bowling googlies and all sorts of things. They were a very accomplished team.
Yes.
There we are. You mentioned earlier on, to go back a bit, Blair's trains.
Oh, yes. I have a fairly strong memory of travelling from Glasgow to Blairs to Aberdeen by train, and yet I don't know how it can be true, because it was a Blairs student train. It was full of the Blairs students. But why would I, as a member of staff, be travelling at the same time as the students if I was going to start my year with a retreat? And I think the answer is probably we didn't have a retreat every year. I mean, not only do I remember travelling by train, but it was on the old line, which was abolished by Beeching's time. It branched, it went to Perth and branched. The line is still there, coming out of the Perth railway station, but it went to Cooperangus, Meagle, Blairentian, maybe? No, I don't think so. Cooperangus and Meagle, and it joined up with the North Line 2 or 3 miles north of Montrose. I presume that's partly because there were several railway companies running trains, the LMS and the LNER and so on. But also, I think it must be true that I was on the boys' train because I have a vague memory that since I was not yet really a member of staff, I didn't feel I had any obligation to exercise any discipline in the train. And it was fairly rowdy, but I don't think it was badly behaved, It wasn't a special. It was just the ordinary train. Yeah. But the fact that we'd travelled, I remember travelling.
I think they booked carriages for the Blairs.
Oh, maybe, yes. I think we left from Buchanan Street Station, which doesn't exist anymore. And we certainly went through Cooperangus and I think Meagle. There may have been another town that I've forgotten.
Forfa, maybe.
Possibly, don't know. But then, I think soon after that, I acquired a car. Not immediately, mind you. And I remember buying the car in Torrey, and the registration was NRG. RG was one of the Aberdeen registrations. NRG 65, and it cost me £180, and it had only, by design, I mean, 3 gears, a first, a second, and a top.
So what kind of car was that?
Ford Prefect, I think. £180 for a second-hand car. Yeah.
So one of the other things that sort of came to my mind as well, thinking about this, was all your different musical abilities with different instruments, and how you entertain people in concerts and so on. But also there was the other thing of St Andrew's Eve concert, I think it was, where you did your Doric thing. So how did you get into that particularly? I mean, obviously Scotland the Watt was on the go, I think, by...
Yes. Well, I've always been interested in languages in general, and as I think I said to you earlier on, having been brought up in Glasgow by parents who didn't want their children to speak like the ordinary Glasgow people, they wanted us to speak proper English. Quite a thought when you put it that way. I was a bit surprised and very pleased to discover that what the ordinary people spoke in Aberdeen, namely Doric, was not considered bad English. It couldn't possibly be, because it wasn't English at all. I mean, I remember another thing you've got there, some is NKRCC, the North Kincardine Rural Community Council. There was one occasion on which we had a meeting of the half dozen of us, and there was an invitation for the council to send a representative to something. I forget what the something was. And none of us were really free to go. And one of the ladies on the council, local lady, said, "But fall gang for us." Well, I mean, say that in Glasgow and they look at you, is that Swahili or is it only Red Indian, So I became very interested in that. Loved the Scotland the What, and there are quite a lot of books that can be used. One of them is called Teach Yourself Doric, and it's a slender volume. And then there's another one called Doric, a Second Blast, I think it's called. Anyway, Teach Yourself Doric. It's a real straightforward teach yourself approach. A little vocabulary, test sentences, and then a twist in the end of a chapter, a kind of jokey bit that only the residents of the Northeast would understand and laugh at.
So before closing then, because I know we've gone on quite a long time, is there anything else that you think that we've missed?
Well,
there's so much we could.
I knew there would be so much. There's quite a lot of things that I would want to say a little bit more about. You talked about the music. Now, at first I had forgotten this, but sometime last week it dawned on me. On one occasion at least, through me and a contact I had in Aberdeen, we invited the Aberdeen School's Youth Orchestra to come to Blairs and give us a concert. And at first we thought, we'll have it in the theatre. But when we really examined it, we found it was better to have it in the play hall. So they played. I mean, I don't know how many pupils came. I would think, at a guess, 60 maybe. And for them, of course, it was an opportunity to give an outside performance. And I don't remember all the pieces that they played, but I do remember that they played Finlandia. And I think it was quite, made quite an impression on the boys, especially any of them that had never been at an orchestral concert. I mean, these were kids of the same age as themselves, and they were playing 60 different instruments. And as the man said, and they all finished at the same time, Oh, dear. Yes. I forget what the man's name was. I should remember, but I don't. He was a very interesting character who was a director of that youth orchestra, and he brought them all out. And then afterwards, when I was thinking about it the other day, I thought, and did we entertain them themselves? Did we give them anything to eat? Did we give them a bottle of lemonade and a cake or something? I just don't know.
I'm sure we would have done.
Well, I'm not so sure, because if I was the one who was organising the Blairs end of it, I probably wouldn't have thought of it. So that certainly... I mean, some pupils came to Blairs already able to play an instrument. There was one clarinetist. In an article I read in the Blairs magazine the other day, there was a trumpeter. So we weren't starting absolutely from scratch, but the brass instruments were taught more or less by me from scratch. And I've often thought since then, apart from the cost of the instruments, why don't more schools teach brass instruments? They are actually easier to play than stringed instruments.
Yeah.
You play a stringed instrument and you get it slightly wrong, it sounds like a cat having its death agony. Play a brass instrument and get it wrong, the worst that can happen is you hit the wrong note. But it's a note.
Yeah. Unfortunately, schools these days seem to be cutting back on so many things because of the
expense.
way things are.
Yeah. Finally, when the college had closed, did I sell them or did I give them away? I think I sold them for a nominal sum to a group who were running a mission somewhere in Central Africa and were anxious to have instruments for a little group that they had set up there. Because after all, most of the instruments we had, although they were perfectly genuine orchestral brass instruments, they were mostly damaged a bit. Brass instruments develop small holes, and a small hole in a wind instrument is fatal because the wind gets out of the hole. And then I remember a man called Shaun, S-H-A-U-N, Shaun Dillon, who came to Blairs quite a lot at my invitation and gave the boys lessons. He was a trombonist. He was very, very tall, about 6'6". And on one occasion, making the point that you don't need to press hard against the mouthpiece of a brass instrument in order to make it sound. What you need to do is get your lips into the right shape. He took a trombone, one of our trombones, put it on top of a kind of, not a chest of drawers, like a small wardrobe that we had in that music room in the new wing, so that the mouthpiece was roughly at his own very tall mouth. And then he put his hands behind his back, so he could not hold the instrument, and blew into it and played perfect music, showing clearly that pressure had nothing to do with it. Yeah, Sean Dillon, I think he's still around in Aberdeen, but I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, when you're thinking back more than 50 years, perhaps not. No, it isn't more than 50 years. 86?
36 years.
36, that's nothing. 36. I remember that, yes. Now, another thing, I remember taking a group of boys to Hadrian's Wall. We made arrangements to stay in a fairly nearby religious house, a Passionist house. I think its name is Minster Acres, and it'll be somewhere near Durham. The idea was we would stay there, and I had my car. Maybe somebody else had a second car. No, I don't think so. So maybe it was only 3 boys. And we drove from there to the actual Hadrian's Wall, which wasn't far away, and walked on it and learned about it and so on. And then the O-grade Latin exam had a section in which Hadrian's Wall was one of his topics. And I remember after the exam was over, talking to the boys and asking them how they had got on. Now, as you go along Hadrian's Wall, there's the actual wall, of course, and every mile there is what nowadays is called a mile castle, which is a small, 4-sided square, a small square fort on the Roman side of the wall, but it's actually designed to be a fortified gateway. There's a gateway in the main wall, and there's a gateway 15 metres away in the inner wall, so that anybody trying to cross the wall would have to use a mile castle to get through, and would, by design, would be stopped in the mile castle and asked his business and so forth. So a mile castle every mile. And in between each pair of mile castles, 2 small turrets, almost like police boxes, you know. So one of the questions in the paper, I remember, was describe a mile castle. And these boys who had actually been there and been inside what remains of the mile castle, you know, walls 4 feet high, 5 feet high, got them mixed up and described the other one and lost a valuable 2 marks or whatever it was. Yeah, but I remember that all right, taking them there.
Another trip that you did far more towards the end was your trip to Annecy as well.
Yes, yeah. That was a very interesting experience.
Because we've hardly spoken about the sisters either, and obviously a very important part of Blair's life.
That's true. How are we for time? Oh, it's 5 o'clock. Well, that's all. I told them I might not be there for Mass. So the sisters, well, the first thing to be said about them, and this will make you laugh, when I first went to Blairs, although I didn't put it in words, I thought of the sisters as being interchangeable, as if a sister was a sister was a sister. Mm-hmm. Crazy. There were, I think, 20 sisters. They had their own convent life, of course. Their superior was French. Some of them had been there for many, many years. And all of them seemed to be very happy to be there. There was an infirmarian, Sister Mary John, who had some kind of qualifications. The others, I think, were in those days were without the sort of qualifications you would be looking for, though later some sisters came who had teaching qualifications and taught. So they did the kitchen work, I think at first without any lay helpers. They did the cleaning of various places. They worked like anything in what then became the fifth and sixth refectory. That was their sewing room. And the poor things, sewing in the sewing room, all of them round the table at once. That was a recreation. Rigid again, you know.
And the other thing was that in that sewing room they were darning the socks, because in those days all the boys' socks were darned.
That's right.
When necessary.
That's right.
Yeah.
And supervising the numbers, and they knew the boys by the linen number.
Yeah, yeah.
Still do sometimes. Yes. I eventually began to realise that I was undervaluing them enormously. I don't think the rector undervalued them. I think he knew very well that we were very lucky to have that community. Very.
And I'm right in thinking that 1986 would have marked the end anyway.
Yes, they were about to go.
Yeah.
They had been told that they would have to leave.
Yeah.
And
so how much of that, how much do you think that might have been a contributory factor to the fact that the college closed? I mean, obviously it's perhaps not the major one, but it must have been a factor.
Well, I don't think the sisters mentioned that they were going to be withdrawing long enough before the college closed for it to have been a factor in the decision. But maybe they did. Maybe they did.
Because they were only down to 4 at that point. You know, the last photograph behind you, there's only 4 sisters left at that point.
Yes, because they had Sheila Strachan and her team working in the kitchen.
That's right.
Well, that's another thing. From my very first day in Blairs, as member of the staff, when I got up in the morning and went along to my sitting room, and I can tell you where that one was, there was a fire already burning in the grate. Yeah. It didn't happen by chance. One of the sisters was, there were 2 sisters, I think, who looked after the prof's corridor. They were more or less like personal housemaids, you know.
Yeah.
And I think probably those 2 sisters thought they were fortunate because they had contact with the priests, whereas some of the others, they knew the priests were there, but they never got a chance to talk to them or anything.
I mean, I don't know if you remember, in the priest rooms there was even a little bell, and when they pressed that, it would ring down beside the scullery, beside the priest refectory.
Yes.
And indeed a little light would come on just outside.
That's right.
the door.
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
But of course, all big houses with an aristocratic household, it had that.
Yeah.
You know, you see it on all the National Trust properties. There's a bell push or a bell handle in every room. Yeah. And down below, the bells are actual bells, and the bells swing and ring, and it says over the top, you know, gun room. This kind of thing. Oh dear. Are these men anxious to close down?
Yeah, I think we must, unless you've got any.
I could go on talking.
I was going to say we probably could, so it's perhaps.
It is entirely up to you. All I would say is, I know that you consulted your own notes before we started this.
A wee bit.
I would just say make sure there's nothing that you wanted to say.
Oh, I see. I don't think I got as far as that. Let me look at the notes.
One the funny thing is, maybe it's serendipity. This means it's coming to an end.
Oh well. on my one, or
And the one that's pointing to you,
That's
Ian,
fine.
that's coming to an end.
I noticed that, but I didn't actually know.
That's why I stuck my head in every now and again. It's
Yeah.
just to see how we're doing.
Well, some of the things I only remember at the last minute, you know,
Oh,
like
it's been absolute
the trip to Annecy and so on. I had not forgotten it, but I had forgotten it today.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we're talking about 20 odd years summarised in 2 hours.
That's right, yeah.
Whatever, you know.
Yeah. Oh, there will be other things probably.
Yeah.
Well, just whilst you're there, you talked earlier about difficult to remember names and so on, but it's certainly a lot of people remember a lot about you. And a chap called Stephen Green has put on the Facebook page, he says, "My year, St Martin de Porres, was the first to be taught the Spanish by none other than the monks." He says, "He had no background of Spanish as far as I know. He was just a total genius." Wait for it, this is the bit. We were then taught by Father Joe Boland. He then says, "I became a principal teacher of Spanish and French, so thank you, Father / Bishop Moran."
Oh, that's very nice.
And you spoke about Kilsyth and Croy. I'm a native of Kilsyth. I'm in Croy Parish, and the only non-Croy parishioner here is Ian.
I live in the shadow of the church at Croy.
What, the sun comes out and cries?
Yeah.
Of course it does. The sun
And you
always
spoke
shines
about giving
on Croy.
lines. You will not remember this, but I vividly remember this. In a case of mistaken identity, you were absolutely convinced that I had done something wrong. You gave me lines and insisted I do them. I complained to Keith O'Brien, who said, "Actually, now we know it's mistaken. It was Mark Convery was the guilty party." But you were convinced it was me. I had to do the lines. I gave you the lines, and Keith O'Brien said, "So the next time you get lines, we'll write it off." So Joe Brannigan caught me doing something else. They said, "You've so many lines." I said, "Would you take a check?"
Lovely. Oh dear, oh dear.
The real thing there was that Keith O'Brien knew you were getting lines again.
Yeah, it's a solid investment.
Well, you know, we were talking earlier about the corporal punishment at St Aloysius College. One reason why I got corporal punishment on one occasion was, on my way to school, I always, at some stage of my career, I always bought a copy of the children's newspaper, I think when I was in third form. And I had it, we always started Mass. We always started school day with Mass, every day. We were to turn up at the church for Mass, the whole school. Well, I'm sitting, or probably kneeling, at my place in St Aloysius Church, and down up front is my school bag and a copy of the children's newspaper. And I started to read the children's newspaper just while there, during Mass. And the Master of Discipline, the chap who also said, "Bills first, bills first," he spotted this and said, "Oh, that'll be a bill then." And I had to go and get the punishment later. I don't know if that's why they made me a bishop, but there you are. Yes, I got the belt for reading a newspaper in church during Mass. We didn't call it the belt, though. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just remains for me, Bishop Moran, to thank you for your contribution today. Your motto as Bishop of Aberdeen was Gaudium et Spes, joy and hope. We warmly wish you both and thank you for your time and your most valuable contribution to this Friends of Blairs Oral History project. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the three of you.